In 1893, the United States was in crisis. A series of global economic issues as well as domestic issues had coalesced into what was called the Panic of 1893, and the economy was in free fall. Unemployment was 43% in Michigan, 35% in New York, 25% in Pennsylvania. The downturn caused a rush on gold by people holding certificates backed by silver that the federal government struggled to pay. Dozens of banks and businesses closed. It was the worst downturn of its kind until the Great Depression. And the last thing that the nation needed was more bad news. When, in May of 1893, Grover Cleveland, who had just been reelected to a second non-consecutive term as president, found a lump in his cheek. Afraid that the news could cause a panic, the president would have a dangerous surgery that he did not know whether he would survive at a critical time in U.S. history and keep it hidden from the public. Grover Cleveland's secret surgery and the questions it raises about the people's right to know about the health of the executive is history that deserves to be remembered. Grover Cleveland holds a unique position in American history. He is the only president elected to non-consecutive terms. He's the only president to get married in the White House, and he was the only Democratic president to be elected in the American Gilded Age, which came to a close after the cataclysmic political shift that followed the fallout of the 1893 Panic. Known as an honest man and sometimes called Grover the Good, he was seen as a man of virtue in an era of deep corruption. Though Cleveland had alienated many important sections in his first term, he still won the popular vote in the election of 1888, but he lost the Electoral College to Benjamin Harrison. One of the primary political conflicts of the era was between Silverites, who supported a policy of free silver or unlimited minting of silver money. The issue was that silver was much less valuable than gold, and much less than the face value of what they were minted into. It caused serious inflation, which benefited debt-strapped farmers who figured that while their debts would remain the same, they would have more money to pay them. Naturally, this was disadvantageous to banking, business, and financial interests, who opposed the bimetalist policy and preferred remaining on the gold standard. Cleveland had fought the Silverite forces during his first term, and Harrison in the intervening term had signed the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, which significantly increased how much silver the government bought. The Sherman Act created a run on gold that threatened the stability of the economy, and though it was only part of what caused the 1893 panic, Cleveland saw it as a threat that had to be removed immediately. But that was before he discovered the tumor. Cleveland had been a lifelong smoker, and the growth was on the left side of his mouth, where he chewed his cigars and tobacco. When he first noticed the lump, he took a mirror and found a crater-like ulcer with a granulated surface. The tumor continued to grow, and on June 18th, he had Dr. O'Reilly, the White House doctor, take a look. O'Reilly described it as the size of a quarter. He removed a small piece and had it sent anonymously to the Army Medical Museum. The pathologist diagnosed it as an epithelioma, a growth that could be either benign or malignant, though he wasn't sure which one it was. The cancer continued to grow, and Cleveland's young wife recalled that it caused him to walk the floor at night. His personal physician, Joseph Bryant, advised that it is a bad-looking tenet. Were it in my mouth, I would have it removed at once. Unfortunately, it wasn't that simple. Even unaware of the cancer, one financial editor wrote that Mr. Cleveland is about all that stands between this country and absolute disaster, and his death would be a great calamity. Cleveland, called Uncle Jumbo, was not in robust health besides, and the 57-year-old suffered from gout and rheumatism. Cleveland feared that if word got out that he was terminally ill in the middle of the political battle over silver, it would weaken his political position and imperil the country. The president agreed to have the operation, but on the condition that it remain a closely held secret. Even Adlai Stevenson, the vice president, would not be told. He chose to have the surgery aboard the yacht of his close friend, Elias Benedict. Benedict was a wealthy banker and was considered one of America's leading yachtists. His boat, the Oneida, was a 142-foot-long pleasure boat on which Cleveland had already logged nearly 50,000 nautical miles sailing and fishing. The public and press wouldn't think it odd then, they reasoned, for him to take a 4-day fishing trip over the 4th of July. Dr. Bryant put together a team of 6 surgeons to perform the surgery, led by Dr. William King, a pioneering brain surgeon who had, in 1888, performed one of the first successful brain tumor removals. They were all sworn to keep the details of the surgery a secret. They would each make their way to the Oneida's dock in New York City from different locations on the night of June 30th, with Cleveland and Benedict arriving later that evening. Dr. Keene was in charge of preparing the ship for the surgery, which included removing all the furniture from the ship's saloon, except for an organ, which was nailed down. For a surgery table, they lashed a chair to a mast in order to keep it stable. Keene also arranged to have necessary medical supplies, including tanks of oxygen and nitrous oxide, secretly brought aboard. The plan was to perform the surgery while the ship was sailing across Long Island Sound, and to deposit the president afterwards at Gray Gables, his summer home in Massachusetts, where his wife was anxiously waiting. The president hoped that doing the surgery in early July would give him enough time to recover before Congress returned in August. If performing a delicate surgery on a large tumor in the president's mouth on a moving ship while the patient is strapped to a chair sounds difficult and dangerous, you'd be right. The situation was made even more perilous by the science of the time. Only during the 19th century had proper oncology and pathology studies been possible, and while improvements had been made, doctors were limited in their ability to perform delicate surgery and prevent infection. The doctors were talented, but not necessarily experienced at this kind of surgery. They would be removing part of the president's jaw, and while Dr. Bryant had written a paper examining similar procedures, he had only performed 2 of them himself. The ship's crew were told only that the president was having some teeth removed, a story that would be repeated to the press. As the ship set sail on July 1st, the party was blessed with good, calm weather. They began the surgery about noon. The doctors made no external incisions, instead using a mirror-backed light to illuminate the mouth, as well as a Luhr cheek retractor, which Keene had brought from Europe. The president was given nitrous oxide as anesthetic. As the doctors performed the surgery, they discovered that the tumor was a large, gelatinous mass that extended upward, coming close to the president's eye. A large part of the jawbone and hard palate was removed by chisel, as well as 5 teeth. There was remarkably little blood loss, and after only an hour and a half, the surgery was successfully completed, and the president's mouth filled with gauze. Matthew Algeo, who wrote a book about the surgery, says modern doctors marvel at this operation. The doctors successfully completed a difficult surgery in half the time it would take to be done today, and on a moving boat. The size of the tumor and the amount of bone removed caused lasting disfigurement to the president's face, which, while partially hidden by his famous mustache, also affected his speech. Later, a rubber prosthetic was made that restored both Cleveland's appearance and his voice. The Oneida arrived in Massachusetts on July 5th, and Cleveland was reportedly recovering well. Dr. Bryant and Dr. Keene stayed to perform a smaller surgery, this one with the new technique of electrocautery. By the end of July, Cleveland was fishing again, enjoying himself and looking healthy. It seemed that the whole operation had gone off without anyone the wiser. But 2 months later, a crack in the story appeared. There had been rumors that the president had been diagnosed with cancer, but they had been easily quashed. It wasn't until the end of August that somebody slipped up. Elisha J. Edwards was a successful reporter working for the Philadelphia Press as their New York correspondent. He was at the pinnacle of his career and had a popular syndicated column he wrote 6 days a week. He was approached by a Dr. Leander Jones at the end of August, who began his conversation. "We have narrowly escaped, I think, having Vice President Stevenson transferred from the Senate chamber to the White House as president." Jones then related the remarkable tale of the secret surgery and that a tumor had been removed on the boat. Edwards was understandably shocked. Jones told him that the source was a dentist, Dr. Hasbrook, one of the physicians who had assisted with the surgery. Jones was sure the story would get out, and so felt no regret passing the story along, but Edwards needed more corroboration before he was willing to put his reputation on the line. He tracked down Dr. Hasbrook at his home and related the story as he had heard it. Hasbrook was aghast. "Some of the physicians who were aboard the yacht must have told you that story," he said. "You could not have obtained it any other way." Seeing that it was already out, Hasbrook told Edwards everything, and added that the president was expected to make a full recovery. Ecstatic, Edwards ran to his office to write the story, worried that someone else would write it before he did. "I had the newspaperman's desire to be the first to publish important news," he said. So sensitive was the information that once he wrote it down, he refused to trust anyone to telegraph it to Philadelphia, and instead used a telephone call to call it into the office of the Philadelphia Press. Newspapers didn't use huge banner headlines much yet, so the title of Edwards' piece didn't stand out, but the content of it did. "The President, a very sick man," it began. Edwards was something of a rarity. He wasn't one for using the sensational writing that so defined the period of yellow journalism. He emphasized the character and strength of the president while describing the surgery with remarkable accuracy. Privately, even Dr. King called the article a good scoop, while publicly, denying every part of it. During the Gilded Age, cancer was almost taboo. Edwards doesn't use the word, but instead describes Cleveland's ailment as that dread and mysterious enemy which physicians scarcely dare to name, and suggested its similarity to the horrific mouth tumor that had taken former President Grant 8 years prior. Edwards was very careful about how he wrote the article, offering excuses for why the doctors lied, and writing that Cleveland only wished to keep people from being overwhelmed by anxiety and suspense. He also reported that the tumor was benign and that the president was no longer in any danger. Other papers that reported in the wake of the revelations were less composed. He had a cancer, said the San Francisco Morning Call. Predictably, the administration denied the claims entirely. Cleveland suffered only from some rheumatism and a short tooth, representatives said, and any reports to the contrary were sheer nonsense. Edwards only identified 2 of the 6 doctors, Hasbrook and Cleveland's physician Dr. Bryant, and Bryant insisted that nothing dramatic at all had occurred on board the Oneida. The other doctors were silent as well. The administration launched a coordinated smear campaign to discredit the report. Newspapers declared Edwards a disgrace to journalism. Cleveland recruited his friends to stonewall other reporters looking to corroborate the story. One of them, editor of a newspaper himself, wrote an open letter that said if the president was sick, his closest friends do not know. Benedict told reporters at the New York World that the report was all bosh and that Cleveland hadn't been at all impaired. He never missed a meal. Even the steward of the Oneida stuck to the story, claiming he had seen Cleveland on deck every day. On Cleveland's return trip to Washington with his wife, then 9 months pregnant, Cleveland made himself visible and chose to walk at times he would normally have taken a carriage. The New York Times reported that his actions bespoke a man enjoying perfect health. On September 6, Cleveland hosted a reception for doctors attending the Pan American Medical Congress, mingling with the guests and thanking them all in a short speech. There was no evidence that he had ever been ill. The ordeal ruined Edwards. His career stalled, and for the next 15 years he struggled to find work. He finally got a job in 1909 with a struggling Wall Street Journal, but his reputation was beyond repair. The health of the president remains an important subject, but even today there is still no clear law or standard regarding what must be publicly released about the president's health. From the drama of President Garfield's slow death after being shot by an assassin in 1880, to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's health and efforts to hide the extent of his disability due to polio, the public interest in knowing that their leader is healthy and strong has weighed against issues of privacy and politics. Cleveland surgery is only one of many illnesses covered up by the White House. For 18 months, the White House concealed that President Wilson had been paralyzed by a severe stroke. President Harding had a heart attack that was reported as food poisoning, until he died 6 days later. Cleveland would persevere through a tumultuous second term, but in 1896 the Silverites took control of the Democratic Party and nominated William Jennings Bryan over Cleveland. He continued to express his opinions and offer advice. Occasionally his name would come up as a potential candidate for president or senate, but he essentially retired from politics. In 1908 he had a heart attack, passed away June 24th, at the age of 71. His last words were, "I have tried so hard to do right." It wasn't until 1917, 24 years after the surgery and 9 years after Cleveland's death, that Dr. Keene published the tale of the secret surgery in full in the Saturday Evening Post to vindicate Mr. Edwards' character as a truthful correspondent. Only then was the story accepted to be true, and Edwards received hundreds of letters of congratulation. He's finally given credit for one of the biggest scoops in American history. And there is one more postscript to the story that didn't come out until 1980, 87 years after the surgery aboard the Oneida. It turns out the president's tumor had been preserved all those years, and modern analysis determined it to be a verrucous carcinoma, a growth of considerable less risk than some had feared. If you want to see that actual tumor, it is on display with other medical oddities at the Mutter Museum of the College of Physicians of Philadelphia. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.